Katherine Snedaker is the CEO and founder of Pink Concussions, a pre-injury education and post-injury medical care advocacy organisation for women and girls with a brain injury, including concussion, sustained from sport, violence or military service. Someone, I think it's safe to say, almost uniquely dedicated to the role. On her way to Australia, she tripped and fell over at Auckland Zoo and sustained not only a concussion but a broken wrist as well. Please welcome Katherine.
I don't think I'm turned, am I turned on? I don't know, but hello everybody. You can't say no to Nick, and you just can't say no to Nick. And I was with Eve Valera, Dr. Eve Valera from Harvard, and when this all happened, she goes, tell Nick he won't make you come. I go, Nick will make me come. She's like, Nick won't make you come. And he had a very sympathetic first email back, and then he suggested there were lovely little carts at the airport that I could push my bags with. So here I am. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have no conflicts to disclose. Would love some if anybody wants to fund us. We love money. This is probably the epitaph that would be on my tombstone. I think this kind of made me, besides being called Roger Goodell, our NFL king, I got called Dollar Rogers Blonde Bimbo Mom of the Week in like 2011, and it actually made me someone interesting on Twitter. The only other thing that I think I was known for is this statement, and it's that asking a concussed player if they're okay to play is like asking a drunk if they're okay to drive. And at the Auckland Zoo, because I thought going bungee jumping was too dangerous, I tripped and fell and landed on 7 volcanic rocks, here, 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 and a lovely makeup person at the airport covered the bruise. As I landed, I saw the rock coming at my head, so I was aware of it, right? And I knew my wrist crunched because I'm osteoporosis, and this is the 3rd time I've broken a wrist. And the second it happened, I turned up, and Eve's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. And all of a sudden, these women were giving me tissues. There was like mothers with tissues. And then all of a sudden, I lost my vision. And I've never had that happen before. I've had multiple concussions. I could not see. And Eve said I got a little floppy, but I sat there. And it was such a miserable feeling. I knew I was either going to die or get better, because it was so unsustainable to feel that miserable. And when I usually break a wrist, I usually want to throw up. But I wasn't dizzy, but I couldn't see, and I just felt miserable. And it took about 10 minutes, and as soon as I was conscious, I'm like, what time is it, Eve? And Eve's like, it was 10 afternoon. And I had no vision with eyes open, then cloud, and then like little bits of mist. And then colors in the mist, and then it was all of a sudden like binoculars were turned and I could see everything. I'm like, what time is it? Like I was conscious that I wasn't aware of how long time had passed, but I knew to ask her. And of course, they carted me in and took me to my ambulance. I tried to negotiate to go by Uber. And I went into Auckland City Hospital, and they did a very nice concussion protocol. I argued with them because I didn't want a CT scan because I thought I had to pay for it. You know, and it's one of those things where I've got a broken wrist. It was hanging there. They're trying to do an assessment. I'm arguing with them. Of course, I don't want an assessment, right? And still, we're having an argument. Like, based on that, raise your hands if if you think I have a concussion. You know, it isn't like the other concussions I've had. And I can shake my head like that. Now, usually when I shake my head like that and I have a concussion, I am miserable. So I've been feeling pretty good about it. Lights don't bother me. I've been feeling really good. The one thing I didn't check was balance. And just right before we went on, we checked, can I stand for 20 seconds? Which I can't. So here's my presentation, slightly concussed. How will being a woman create obstacles for healing after brain injury? Oh, and I haven't had a headache. It's sex plus gender. So what does that mean? The definition of sex is the biological differences, male and female. Like animals don't pick their gender, right? A pig is not trans pig. A pig is male or female, right? They can't decide. Definition of gender, humans, we have the ability, there's an entire rainbow of ways that we can feel about ourselves, and we can decide what we are, right? And so both of those come into play. So it's the sex issues, the biological, and then the gender, the societal ones. This is my friend Ashton. She turned 19 in Iraq. She was one of the first lioness. She was frontline with the military. There's no concussion protocol, really, I think, very much of one at all at that time, much less one for women. This is me in 2018. I gave the first, I'm a social worker, first concussion presentation to the US Army in front of 500 NATO commanders, all in camouflage. And as all of these incredibly brilliant doctors are pushing me out on the stage, I'm like, why am I giving this lecture? And they're like, because they can't, you know, fire you, defund you, kick you out of the Army, right? But I explained to the NATO commanders that there are sex differences, there are biological vulnerabilities that women have, but there's also gender differences, rather. So, and there's also risk-taking behavior. And that was last Saturday, Ashton back from Iraq and Afghanistan, presenting with Mahim Addison from the VA, Stanford VA, and Eve Valera and I at the World Brain Mapping Conference on Saturday. This is Siobhan Cadigan. So that's an example of why it's important in the military to have these guidelines. Siobhan Cadigan, she won 18 caps for Scotland. She had a number of concussions, was very much struggling with her concussions, was sent back to UK medical care. She was not sent to a specialist, which if she had been a male player, she would have been sent to a different set of protocol, a higher level of care. She ended up taking her life, and it is it is sort of the concussion story of the last couple of years up in Scotland. And we had a sports concussion protocol discussion, and that's her father and her partner accepting an award we gave her. And this was the title, Is It Time for a Female-Specific Concussion Protocol? This really upset a lot of people. This was very controversial. And in the end, the panel, which is some really amazing people, Tina Masters, Chris Giza, Inga, Marshall Grant, there's some Willie Stewart, some great people there. And in the end, they decided it was too controversial to have the debate we had scheduled. And we instead did a panel where everyone kind of gave simple statements. So it's very controversial. And there's a lot of money behind whether we decide to do this or not. The last topic is domestic violence. We got one of the first articles because I knew Nicole Fisher, and we got together and wrote an article together in Forbes magazine right before 2019 came, right before COVID came. And this is an article we spent 2.5 years on with the New York Times, March 2022, after COVID. And what was interesting about this article is it was a bunch of us all working over 2 years on this article, but a judge wrote me from Texas who had spent 3 decades on the doing, you can tell, word retrieval, restraining orders against men, word retrieval, that was a sign. Restraining orders against men when women had come forward. He never thought of any of those women in 30 years, any of those women would have had a brain injury. Anytime he saw a woman who was maybe stumbling, word retrieval, couldn't remember, he always thought it was drugs, alcohol, or trauma. It never occurred to him. We also had a woman who wrote in who had actually she put a comment in that article. For 20 years, she had run a domestic violence shelter, and it never occurred to her that the women were combative, that didn't remember things, that had difficulty doing schedules and maybe didn't get along well. Never occurred to her they had brain injury. So those examples of military, domestic violence, and sports where it does make a difference whether we push through the financial, the political, the other issues to really talk about this. So we finally got the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, who I've been bugging for a decade. We finally got a flyer out. It's not on their website yet, but It's out there on girls may experience sports-related concussions differently than boys. So that was 10 years to get that out, and they're really kind of conservative. Don't love it. I would edit it a bit. Next time I will, but that's pretty exciting. So quick background, how does a social worker come to Australia? One, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've been trying to get here for decades. I've had events. We had an event March 2020, which was really bad timing with Michael. So I'm so excited to be here. So I live in Norwalk, Connecticut. My journey starts as a social worker after education in journalism, mom of 3 boys, youth sports coach, had no interest in concussion, had multiple of them, but learned you really didn't talk about them. My son got a concussion at school. They called me to say he hit his head, could I come pick him up? I have 3 brothers, 3 boys. I'm like, is he bleeding? They're like, no. And I'm like, well, why am I picking him up? And they're like, what does a soccer ball do to a head, right? So I picked him up, and he seemed just kind of like a little bit out of it. So we went to the doctor's office. A new test had come out at the time that he took, impact test, which I thought was more than it was at the time. But the nurse came out and said, we think his brain is scrambled. That was her wording. No, we didn't even know how to talk about it in 2008. He would go on to have, in 13 months, he had 6 concussions. We kept returning him back. He needed to stay out probably 3 months, but we would return him to his life, and he had 2 other brothers. He had to have a 3-year gap with no concussions. He would get concussed his first year of high school, have 4 more. So he suffered 10 concussions. It wasn't until he was 18 where we did a really thorough neurocognitive testing with him, where they discovered as a preemie he had a brain bleed, and he had a vulnerability, one having ADHD, but also that initial brain injury as an infant, and we never thought about that. He then went on in trouble with drugs and alcohol, which is also very common. He's now 5 years sober and working with kids with brain injury and sober kids, so helping kids get sober. So very proud of him. Heads up concussion materials had come out at that point. So like a good social worker, I brought those to my teams. The sports, I sort of became the sports concussion mama in town because social workers kind of do that kind of thing. I had a concussion, Sports Cap was my first concussion website, and Twitter. Twitter was kind of new then, it was kind of fun. And I ended up meeting some pretty amazing people. Twitter was not as so sketchy as X is now. I happened to get called up by the NFL. That's Roger Goodell in the center. And the NFL called me in, and I ended up coming in second in their look for how they were going to handle youth sports concussion. That's extremely scary, because I'm just mom handing out CDC flyers, running little concussion fairs. But the NFL really wasn't looking for evidence-based programs. They were just looking for a marketing campaign. So I got to meet a lot of people, and they didn't give me any money, but they got to go to a lot of events with them. And I got to meet some great concussion doctors, because at the time they knew mamas were the secret to having boys play football. So they invited a lot of mamas in. So it was kind of a time, interesting time. So there's me and Roger. I started tracking the concussions in our schools and ended up writing papers on those later on, but I tracked concussions in 11,000 kids. So I'll show you that data later. So it was pretty cool, this youth sports concussion thing. At the time, there were some other people that wanted to do it, so it was getting a little sketchy. I ended up working in a concussion clinic, and this was a group, it was supposed to be of boys and girls, and it ended up being girls, and it was 13 girls that had post-concussion syndrome that we called at the time, which we don't call it anymore. And I had them in, and we tried some exercises that didn't work. Then we ended up doing restorative yoga. Then they all came together and talked, and we did that twice a week for 10 weeks. And the girls got better. They didn't know anyone else going through that. I also brought in kids who had recovered from concussions to talk to them. They also hadn't met kids that had long-term concussions symptoms and then had met them. So that was really great, but when we got done at the end, it took me twice a week, it took the time at the PT place, plus the yoga teacher, and it wasn't financially viable. The concussion clinic said, we can't make money off this, neither did the PT clinic, so that ended up that. But I learned a lot from those girls. And there's the girls with one of the boys that came in to talk to us. And so at that whole time, I was getting calls immediately from parents of boys, like, well, they just fell, they just got a concussion, we just left hospital. But I was getting girl parents calling me like 3 weeks later or a month later. She fell on the basketball court, she took all of her exams, and now she has a problem. I thought they were bad parents. I didn't really know any girl parents, but I thought they were just bad parents. Why are they waiting so long? And in my studies with the town and Christine Masters at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we see that girls are brought into care later than boys. It'd be interesting in your research to see if women are coming in later, or in the adult phase, because the girls are brought 5 to 7 days later than the boys. So pink concussions on Twitter. Pink was the shortest number of letters on Twitter. Concussion's already 10 letters, and at the time it was under 140 characters. So that's how pink concussions. So I put all the research that I found up there, and I thought I would never have to like deal with this again. And then I got cancer, which I really hadn't planned on. And I was not interested in cancer. When they told me I had cancer, I said, you don't understand, I'm interested in neurology, and I think I have CTE, and I'm in Chris Nowinski and Ann McKee's study, and I'm not interested in cancer. So I had to do cancer, but I learned a lot in that year of doing cancer. People are really nice to you when you have cancer. And this is probably the slide I'll also be known for. I got divorced and got one casserole, and that's like a lasagna, like people bring you. Hurricane Sandy killed the house, got some more casseroles. Breast cancer, those women wouldn't stop cooking for me. And I was going to the CrossFit gym. I was really active during cancer. Concussions, my kid had 10. No one had ever brought us like a snack. People are not very nice. And when I do youth sports talks, I'm like, if you have 30 kids on your team, whatever team it is, you're going to get 3 concussed kids every season. We know about 10% of kids concuss. Can you make some food for those 3 families? Can you be a little nicer? So that's what cancer taught me, is how nice. And I was making money for the doctors. $300,000 worth of chemo and radiation went through my body. Like, I made a lot of money for people that year. It doesn't happen in concussion. So pink concussion started. I knew I wanted sports, domestic violence, military service. Those were the taglines in 2012. And I had talked to people in all those areas, those silos. None of those people were talking to each other. Sports data. We'd been collecting data for a while on female concussion. Accidents. The motor vehicle people knew, and they have different crash test dummies. Military service, they knew that as soon as planes were taking off with female pilots, they needed to redesign those aircraft, because when those women ejected out of those seats, wasn't the same. Domestic violence, Eve's starting to do this in 2002. So all of those things together became what I put on pink concussions. Again, I thought I would not have to think about this any longer. This is the first conference on women in concussion. I used my kids' college money to run this. I knew I was the bouncer at another event for the dean of the Georgetown Medical School, and twisted his arm lightly, and he let me use Georgetown. Those are the speakers. Chris Giza signed the letter with me. He's a really great doctor at UCLA. We invited 120 speakers. They all said yes. We had 300 people in the room. So that was super cool. I'm looking kind of stunned on the end there because I'm AV, AT, doing logistics for everything. But it was an amazing event. And a lot of people didn't know each other. The military people didn't know each other. The sports people didn't know each other. And a lot of research came out of that because they started talking. Because we're so siloed by our mechanism of injury. Don't know what this is. My slides aren't working, so we'll just see what it is. Oh, so these are research things. I'm going to skip through these. This is the first study that I did in 2013 through Twitter, and we asked why women were hiding their concussions and why men were hiding their concussions. And at the time, this is a different generation, so this is 2013, and they were average age of 24, 25. 70% of the women were hiding their concussions and 79% men. So this goes way back. But when my co-authors wrote the paper, they just said, men hide their concussions more than women. And I didn't see the last draft. And it really annoyed me because I'm like 70% of the women. Also, the women were unaware of the concussions, why they weren't reporting, and the men, it was allegiance to team. Different reasons. If you're educating different groups about concussion, you have to understand why they won't tell you, and that will vary. This is one we did playing the game or gaming the system, where I had seen over and over. This is, well, actually, we asked current high school students in 2017, and you can see how those rates had gone down. So I think we've improved with kids reporting concussions. But at the time, all the teachers were saying all these concussion protocols, these kids are exaggerating their symptoms, they don't want to come back to school, they don't want to come back to sport. So we showed that the kids were actually minimizing their symptoms to come back to school. They were not really magnifying them to delay them. And they also were minimizing. So the kids are coming back early because we just have to ask what their symptom load is. So are the kids actually telling the truth? If anything, we found they were minimizing them. Also the same with return to school, we found that girls were taking longer than boys. And again, girls are 22 days out. So another paper we did with our town. And what we had said is we do concussion, we track concussions every year, you get one number. What does that tell you? If you have a high rate of concussion at a school, does that mean you're finding more concussions or you're practicing more dangerous sports? So are you penalized for getting a higher number? So we broke those numbers down, and we found that females had a longer delay to actually being reported, and the title's not showing, but it says how long the parents take to bring the kids in. Their parents were bringing the girls in 4 days later. If anyone has an idea why, they haven't done the research yet, but it'd be interesting to see also if it's international. So concussion has been long viewed through a masculine perspective. Traumatic brain injury occurs twice as often as males and females from ER data. And we know certain groups go to the ER and certain don't. In the United States, it's $1,400 to walk into an ER. There's a whole group of people, including myself, that won't go to ER. I found out Auckland, it was free. This didn't cost me anything, but this whole thing in the United States would have cost me $10,000. I don't go to ERs. So on the football field, in American football, here's a quote in 1967 that football at that point was being used as the laboratory for traumatic brain injury. You want to find brain injury? You go to a football field. And then it was about, when I was growing up, hits were what made the sport great. That's what the TV was all about. In the laboratory, men were using female animals initially and found out that the menstrual cycle, and it's actually estrol in rats, but it was affecting the results. So what they decided to do, the researchers at the time, is that was messing up their data. They needed more animals. There was more things going on. So they ended up not using female animals. So you're not studying half the animal population. This is another paper, which I'm going to skip through. I'm going to skip through this, too, for a timing thing. Concussion research has looked at 80% of most of the data that we have now has been predominantly from males. And this was a study that came out in the British Sports Journal. So I went around and I was asking researchers why women were excluded from their research. And this is what I did. After I recovered from cancer, I did like Make-A-Wish, and I went to 14 concussion conferences the first year. And I went to the IOC meeting in Monaco, and I met the greatest Australians. One of them I'm going to dinner with, Alex Donaldson, Caroline Finch, the Australian researchers there. I mean, I'm like no one from nowhere. The Australians were so nice, and I've stayed in contact with them for years, so I really want to thank. And you're in a country where everywhere else, when the Australians come, people listen to them. Like, you are in a beautiful country, which also is highly respected for what the protocols are. Vicky, I'm going to have, I don't think you know how good the people are that are here. The other thing I said is if researchers had males and females in their study, they weren't looking at the sex-related data on the other side. So why aren't you reporting the results by males and females? So we know traumatic brain injury at ERs present with more males than females. Why? If we look at the data by age, we see that when the younger ages, there is less difference between males and females. But in this age group, 5 to 20, it really males and females, you have many more males. So why is that? And this is why. Risk-taking behavior. This was me and my brothers. This is me and my sons. That's the difference. More access to drinking more access to firearms. I'm getting the 5-minute Nick walk. So risk-taking behavior. So the research has shown since 2012, which is the American Sports Academy position, that females sustain at a higher, more concussions in the higher rate than males. They report a higher number and more severity of symptoms and a longer duration of recovery. So in sports with similar rules and similar risk, right? Risk is that act, so sports with similar risk, females sustain more concussions than their male counterparts. Why? Is it sex or is it gender? So I'm going to skip through this one with Nick looking at me. This is the statement I've said to more women over the years. Because women call me, they think they're bad, they think they're crazy, they think they're stupid, they're thinking they're malingering, and they have a brain injury. So I'm going to skip through this. I couldn't really cut things down. So how long to recover? If women take longer to recover, but we tell them 7 to 10 days, and they don't recover in that time frame, they feel like they're bad, stupid, and people around them think they're malingering. That doesn't happen with cancer. No one ever said to me, "Are you sure it's cancer?" So sex differences. So this is the photo that I was waiting for, that, like, I grew up with smoking. This is your lung on smoking. So this study in 2018, this is the axons, this is the nanotubulars, the way down on the nerves in our, the axons in our brain. If you cut them in half, females have thinner nanotubulars and fewer of them. And if you cut them in half with the women's nanotubulars, you get breaking at more when the brain is torquing. So this is true in the rodent models and in the animal models. So that may be a biological difference for recovery. And then also, I see the wave. And then also with our menstrual cycles, and that's a really big issue with menstrual cycle. So if you're in the luteal phase, when your progesterone is high, and that's when you get a concussion and it drops down, then we also see more symptoms. Women on birth control do not experience this, and that's also a very touchy subject in the United States. This suggests that birth control could possibly be, for female athletes, something that will help if they got a concussion, but too touchy to talk about. Neuroendocrine disorders. Here's a study that in women and women versus males, that in this Arizona pediatric patient study, that women had endocrine disorder 64% to males. So endocrine, period, menstrual cycle. And I have done over 100 videos interviewing some really cool researchers. So if you want to hear more about that, that's Bruce Ortez. So it's the chemical cascade, but that Chris Giza's model that we showed, Chris has only done that in male rats, and I've been annoying him to do female rats. So we need to have gynecologists as part of our care. We need to understand the women's menstrual cycle before the concussion and after. Gender differences are male-funded research, social vulnerability, access to care, and gender-based violence. So women with TBI are more likely to have poverty, social isolation, lack of family supports, less likely to be referred to rehab after an injury, lower rates of returning to work after a TBI, also less sexual and reproductive health. So that, again, we're back to the menstrual cycle, and for the lawyer, we have to include possible need for IVF and fertility treatment in those rewards when we're looking for rewards after an accident. And abuse and violence. Women with disabilities are more likely to be significant victims of abuse and violence. And no matter their status, women with disabilities are more vulnerable. So Eve's really quick. I'm going to show a couple of things of Eve's study. Actually, I'll just do that. So if you know 3 women that have had, if you think of 3 women you know, one is likely to have suffered sexual violence. If you know 6 women, then 2 women. If you know 9 women in your life, the likelihood is 3. And in Eve's study, what she found was that anywhere from 70 to 80% of those women also experienced a TBI. So we think probably the factor of 10, the number of women with domestic violence TBIs to sports TBIs. It's kind of if sports are the iceberg above the line, then domestic violence will be the iceberg under the line. So really important, and Eve's going to be speaking at the September event. She's an amazing speaker. So definitely check Eve out. So lastly, we have Pink Concussions Domestic Violence Task Force. Anyone's welcome to join it. We do every Tuesday, last Tuesday of the month. Love to have you part of that. We have over 500 members, and all our past meetings are on our YouTube channel. I have spent a lot of time doing YouTube channel. Love to have anyone on that YouTube channel that wants to check out the videos. I probably have more views if I put my dogs up there, but if you're interested in brain injury, I've interviewed some pretty amazing people. And last is, I'm going to skip ahead. This is articles. I also have done the only panel of women of color, really important. Their experience is really important and differs from people not of color, and it's important to realize how systemic racism really affects people with TBI. In the United States, if your skin is black, you're more likely with a TBI to go to prison than you are to rehab. And we have 7,500 women in our support groups. We have 15 groups on Facebook. And brain banks. So I'm the largest, Pink Concussions is the largest recruiter for the VA PTSD brain bank, but we also work with brain banks New York, we work brain banks in Toronto, and Willie Stewart in Northern Ireland and the UK, and love to be able to recruit for the Australia, if any brain banks out there are interested. And what we do is we make sure that women can go and pledge to their brains, but also they sign up for IRB research. We never ask them for any money. It's not a marketing tool. They don't just get a little sticker. They actually sign up with IRB research. So there's that, and there's Willie Stewart. And that's the end, and thank you all, and a little slow, but hey, on a concussion, I don't think I did so bad.